Shri Prabhupada ki. Translation, please hear. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Purport, please hear. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impersonalist must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals, on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there was no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance of rejuvenation, for going back home, back to Godhead. And therefore, generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of life other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of a swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being, because a swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So one should always remember that the genitals, sexual pleasure, the woman and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of a dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of a dog by the perception of God consciousness. Srimanglacharan. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadame Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanuste Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatrobhyascha Kripa Sindhu Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityanand Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktar Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Nirabidyata Shishnove Prajananda Mritarninaha Upastha Asit Kamanam Priyam Tad Ubhyayashrayam. Hare Krishna again. Again, I'll try my best. This is, I've never given class in a mask, so I'll try. So today's class or lecture is about sexual pleasure. And in Bhagavatam it says it's one of the most, it's probably the topmost topic for materialists. So it's a very sensitive, awkward topic to talk about. So again, I'll do my best. So please excuse me. So devotees of the Lord are detached from, as such, sexual pleasure. And they see it as something that can be utilized for the Lord rather than for their own pleasure. So they can, if it's not being utilized for the pleasure of the Lord, then it should be completely rejected. So in Nectar of Instruction, the first verse, it says, Vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam jivva vegam uddharo prastha vegam, which means a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So in Nectar of Instruction, it says that the urges of the genitals, the sex impulse, can be controlled when not used necessarily. So the genitals as such should be used to beget Krishna-conscious children only. And otherwise they should not be used. So in our movement, it's encouraged that marriage, so in the Krishna-conscious movement, encourages marriage not for the satisfaction of the genitals, but rather for begetting Krishna-conscious children. So we might think that the first part is more towards what what we're inclined towards, but the fact is the after part, which is actually having children and bringing them up as devotees, that's the real service. So as soon as children are a little grown up, they are sent to, or this is from Nectar Instruction, they are sent to Gurukul schools, and then when they are trained, they become fully Krishna conscious, and then once they are devotees, that's from the beginning they are taught that how to control parts of their bodies, and that's how in the previous, in the old times, that's how it used to work. From a young age, they were brought up to control their senses. Nowadays, very young people cannot control their senses, and thus we see so many bad things happening. So it is said that all these Krishna-conscious children, many of them are required, and one who is capable of bringing Krishna-conscious offspring is allowed to utilize his genitals. That is the only use. So as far as the urges of the genitals are concerned, there are two, proper and improper, or legal and illicit sex. So when a man properly matures, he can marry according to rules and regulations of Shastra, and then he uses his genitals to beget, as it says in Bhagavatam, nice children. Nowadays we see even the youngest of young kids are very aggressive, active, not really nice, but it really depends on parenting as such from a young age if a kid turns out to be good or bad. So this is as such legal and religious when a child is born for the purpose of him becoming a devotee. So otherwise, he may adopt artificial means to satisfy demands of the genital, and this can turn into a type of addiction as such. So people get addicted to these sort of things, and then once they get addicted to such a thing, it really takes a grasp on their mind, and they can't control their mind into anything, and it's just always trying to satisfy genitals and even other body parts when people get addicted. So they don't have any restraint. they can do whatever they want as such. So when one indulges in illicit sex life, as defined in Shastras, either by thinking, planning, talking, or actually having sexual intercourse, by satisfying his genitals by artificial means, he is caught in the clutches of Maya. So these instructions apply not only for householders but also tyagis, or those who are renounced in the order of life. So again, this is not for one group of people, like young people or old people. This is for every sort of person. So Sri Jaganananda Pandita, he says that in one of his verses, he says that, "My dear brother, you are in the renounced order of life, and you should not listen to talk about ordinary worldly things. Nor should you talk about worldly things when you meet with others. Do not think of women even in your dreams." So he also says that you have accepted the renounced order of life with a vow that forbids you to associate with women. If you associate with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as you'll always remember the incident of Chota Haridas, where he was rejected by the Lord. And then he says, "Hidaya yeta Radha Krishna sarvada sebiye," which means that always remain humble and serve the lordships, Sri Radha Krishna, in your hearts of hearts. So he basically, in this verse, he says that you have renounced your body, so there's no point of you even thinking about women or other sorts of things. So Garuda is like the enemy of snakes. Impersonalism is the enemy of devotion, and as such, lust or greed is the enemy of a conditioned soul. So in Bhagavad Gita 16:21, it says the three gateways to hell, and it says that this is the beginning of demoniac life. One who tries to satisfy his lust, and when he cannot control his anger and greed, and thus when you cannot control your lust, anger and greed arises. So in 16:21, in Bhagavad Gita, it says that a sane person who does not want to glide down to the species of demoniac life must try to give up these three enemies, which can kill the self to such an extent that there is no possibility of liberation from this material entanglement. So just the conviction of how this verse is said should be a warning as such. It says that there is no, to such an extent that there is no possibility of liberation from this material entanglement. So lust is a very powerful thing, and it seems impossible to overcome. So people take vows to fight against these desires, and sometimes they think that, I'm winning this battle, but they find out that they are still plunged in this ocean of material desire, and it just continues on and on until people get frustrated, and it's very hard to control. So this is due to our previous samskaras, so impressions, our chitta, our subconsciousness. Every activity, every thought, every sensual pleasure, experience of a conditioned soul produces a samskara. So each samskara becomes added to a stockpile of mental impressions, and that is, it's not even touched until we're at our deathbed. So sexual acts, thoughts of sex, they produce very strong samskaras, and these samskaras influence our disposition, our vritti, and they give a rise to more material desires. They're very strong in that way, that they, if you have that one desire, it can force you to, opens other paths into other desires which you didn't even think of. So these samskaras, these impressions, they're from previous births. So they are, they're embedded within us so deep into our subconsciousness that even, Maharaj actually said this, Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj, that even even a seriously practicing devotee may still have strong sexual desires due to these samskaras from their previous lifetimes. So it says that even an apparently pure brahmachari may have latent sexual desires that can emerge and destroy him at any time. And that was the same case with Ajamil. We see in Srimad Bhagavatam 6.1.53, I think, 56, that how can one overcome this eternal enemy of lust and this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization? So in Bhagavatam 3.39.41 it says that we have no real knowledge or intelligence as such to overcome this, and that's why we've been Acharyas have said a few things, and I'll list them now. And these things can help control, or even if we're not in that phase, just to be cautious about things. So that there is a process to overcome this attraction, or this attraction. And that process is a simple system of devotional service, as we've talked about for a long time. So only by devotional service can mature desires be entirely overcome. And according to Ayurveda or even other types of treatment, the cure for the disease may not be immediate. You're not going to see a person who's taking medicine see a cure within 10-15 minutes. It takes that 1 week or a few weeks before that person is fully recovered, or even if it's a deeper rooted problem, it can take years before even you see a glimpse of like 1% that it gets fixed. But it's that patience that you need to work through, and that trust that something will happen and it will happen for the good. So it says that diseases like lust are rooted deeply and they are complex, and we've been dominated by these desires for millions of lifetimes. All these samskaras have been deeply rooted in our bodies, in our hearts, and it's not easy to shake them off. But to overcome, we need to make serious, mature decisions to continue with devotional service, so that throughout our lives we don't even have that thought of anything according like lust. So let's say if you're doing it your whole sadhana properly, you're chanting, everything is good, you don't even have that time to think about other things. And that's the mature decision that we need to make. That we need to associate our mind in things that kind of deflects us from thinking in other ways. So there's a very not funny but kind of funny story about Narad Muni, and he was once doing like austerities in a cave. He was praying, and Indra was very anxious to see his austerity, and he tried to disturb Narad Muni while he was chanting or doing his austerities. And he sent Agni Dev, Vayu Dev, and some other deities to stop the penances that were happening. And they failed, and at the end Indra handed it to Kamdev. And even Kamdev tried really hard, and he couldn't dissolve or kind of stop what Narad Muni was trying to do. And when Narad Muni got up, when he stopped the penances, all the devs were like, "Oh, you are so great." They pleased him with the words that they were saying. And Narad Muni, he after being very pleased to hear all these words, he became very arrogant, and he thought of himself even above God. And he went to Vishnu and Shiva, and he told them what had happened. And just through the way Narad Muni was talking, Vishnu is like, okay, he's become very proud, so I need to teach him a lesson, so I'm going to teach him a lesson. And then the Lord, what he did was he started a Maya kind of web and put Narad Muni in it. And it was that there was a city whose king was Shalnidhi, and he had a beautiful daughter. And one day Narad Muni was passing, and his eyes fell on the city, and he went to meet the king. And the king introduced his daughter, and Narad Muni was fascinated. And just by seeing like the world through his arrogant eyes, he thought, okay, I am greater than God. I am God. I should also get a wife. So what he did was he went back to Vishnu and he said that make me like you, so that you can so that I can please the daughter and the king, and then thus I can get married. So Vishnu, being Vishnu, he kind of tricked Narad Muni and made his face into a monkey face. And so Narad Muni, like, very confidently went back into the where the king and everyone was, and the king actually had a swayamvar, which is like where a lot of people come to challenge for the hand of the daughter. So Narad Muni was there very confidently with his monkey face, and what actually happened was the daughter would go past everyone, and so she went past Narad Muni and she started laughing, and Narad Muni was like, why is she laughing? And then he saw that, oh, he has a monkey face, and then everyone was laughing at Narad Muni. And even to make things worse, she continued on, and she picked the one person who wasn't from this world, and that was Vishnu, who was standing in line as well. And this really infuriated Narad Muni, and at the end he cursed Vishnu, and he said that you made me suffer by making me into a monkey, and he said you gave me a monkey face. So he said you will also be unhappy in the future through separation of a woman, and a monkey will save you. And then we see that in Ramayana, where monkeys save, not save, but help Ram. So this is a very funny way that if people like Narad Muni can kind of develop, not feelings, but just get a tinge of that arrogance through that I can also get a wife, I should also be lustful. In terms of that form, who are we on this earth who have no control over our senses, our desires, to even think about controlling? But we have a very big controlling factor, and that is our devotional service that we go through. So we need to understand that everyone is agitated as such, and apart from completely pure devotees who are really rare in this world, everyone is sexually agitated. Even from Brahma down to ants, bugs, everyone is disturbed by attraction with other humans or other beings. But it's the way we control it that differentiates us with animals. So even sannyasis and other advanced devotees get attacked by Maya as such, but it's how they defend off Maya at that point that's the important thing. So because they have practiced controlling their desires, they are able to remain steady in Krishna consciousness rather than, like I said in last week's class, they jump from mode of goodness to mode of passion. So we should not become discouraged that thinking that sex desire is impossible to overcome. We must have the conviction that it is possible. So Prahlad Maharaj, he compares sexual desires to it's like an itch. In Srimad Bhagavatam 7:9-45, he says that it irritates and we want to scratch it. But if we scratch it, it gets worse. It's better to tolerate it without scratching. And then in due course of time, the irritation will gradually go away, rather than if we scratch it, it gets bigger and bigger and we want to scratch even more and more and more, and it keeps going. So we have to be realistic that in almost all cases, this takes a considerable time. You need patience, you need faith, that even basic faith, that you have what it takes to overcome all these overwhelming desires. So what we have to do, we have to go into Krishna consciousness. We have to pray to Krishna that he helps us control this mind. And Prabhupada says it in a funny way. He says we have to go to Krishna, come to Krishna consciousness. We have to pray to Krishna so that this rascal mind will stop controlling us. And if you think it's a very funny thing to say, because it's our mind and we are kind of controlling it, but he says as if it's not us. So materialists think that sexual indulgence is the greatest happiness in the material world, and therefore they make elaborate plans to satisfy their senses, especially genitals, And this is generally found in the Western world, where regular arrangements to satisfy their life in that form is made. And it's not made from a married stage, it's made even before that, and it's also made at a young age, which is very, it's not the right way to do things according to Shastra. So actually, the lust and sexual desires are not to make anyone happy. Prabhupada says even the hippies who have given up the materialistic comforts of their fathers and grandfathers cannot give up the sensual happiness, sensational happiness of sex life. Such persons are described here as kripanas or misers. So the human form of life is the greatest asset as such, and in this life we only have one goal, and that goal is so that we can attain Krishna Prem. And if we're too busy indulging ourselves in materialistic things like what we've talked about today, then it's just a waste of time, waste of a life, which is very pure, a life which is very hard to get. So according to, because of lack of education, lack of culture, nowadays in the Western world, especially in this Kali Yuga, we're trapped and people are victimized as such, that our sex life is happiness, it's false happiness, it's not real. So Prahlad Maharaj advises that one must not be misled by this civilization of sense gratification, especially not by sex life. Rather, one should be sober, avoid sense gratification, and be Krishna conscious. The lusty person who is compared to the foolish miser never gets happiness by sense gratification. He continues and he says, the influence of mature nature is very difficult to surpass. But as stated by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 7:14, Mam eva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite, that if one voluntarily submits to the lotus feet of Krishna, he can be saved very easily. So in reference to this, there's a very nice verse in Yamunacharya. He says this verse, and in the verse it says, since I have been engaged in transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought, and my lips curl with distaste. So Yamunacharya had formerly been a great king who enjoyed sexual happiness in various ways, and since he later engaged himself in the service of the Lord, he enjoyed the spiritual bliss and hated to think about the sex life. And these thoughts came to him, and whenever the thoughts came to him, he would spit because it was out of disgust. So Prahlad Maharaj in Srimad Bhagavatam 7.3.30, he says, Matirna Krishna prayata savatove mito bipadyate graha vritanam. He says, for those who have decided to continue their existence in this material world for the gratification of their senses, there is no chance of becoming Krishna conscious, not by personal endeavor, by instruction from others, or by joint conferences. They are dragged by the unbridled senses into the darkest region of ignorance, and thus they are madly engaged in what is called chewing the chewed. So this verse is very, very nice as such. It's also a warning, the way it's said with conviction again, like the other verse I said before, that we are kind of trapped in this chewing the chewed form of life, and we're trying to extract as much ras as we can from these activities when there's nothing in it at all. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna admits that it is very difficult to curb the restless mind, and he assures that it is possible for through constant practice and by detachment that we can kind of forget this life as such. So Prabhupada in a conversation says that by training one can forget sex life. So traditionally, like in the old times, kids were trained from a young age to that they were more favorable towards spiritual advancement rather than material desires and all these things. But nowadays we've been brought up in a highly disturbed society, as such that we think our sense control is very low. We think that we need to do this, do that before we can proceed to other things. So rather, we need to, even though it's difficult, that control through devotional service is very important. So it says in Bhagavad Gita that it is very difficult to control the mind and senses, especially in the modern age. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Unless we, this isn't in Bhagavad Gita, this was in a class by Prabhupada. And he says, unless we at least give it a try, we are not even civilized human beings. What to speak of spiritual aspirants? So certainly Krishna will help us through, when we pray to Krishna that, okay, this is happening to me, I'm getting all these desires, I'm getting all this, I'm getting all that. Just through the simple thought of thinking of Krishna will deter your mind, will tell your mind to think another way, and thus we stop thinking about these things. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita it says, by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, everyone will get all perfection. So Prabhupada explains that everyone wants to fulfill lusty desires. So unless one is in the modes of goodness or transcendental, everyone will like. That is the material world, Rajas Tamaha. Just like I am a hungry man, there is food stuff. Same thing. Just as we are human, we are full of these lusty desires. So it says, it is said that marriage is legalized, and the form, the passion and the desire is all the same, regardless of if we're married or not. But in Vedic law it says that it's better if we're married, then we will be controlled. So one who is not married should not even think about having lusty desires. So in Grihastha life, the same lusty desires under rules and regulations are allowed, as such that without a person being married, that all those desires turn into things that shouldn't be done until they are married. So everyone in this material world has come with lusty desires and greediness, even higher demigods like Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. But Lord Brahma, it is said that unless one is fully Krishna conscious, this lusty desire cannot be checked. It is not possible. That is tapasya, that voluntarily we accept some inconvenience of not satisfying our lusty needs. So it's tapasya as such. And then tapasya means being avoiding sexual desire as well, because it's a hard thing to do because of the strong samskaras from our previous lifetimes. So the first step is that even before we start tapasya, the first step is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says Hare Nama, that if we chant Hare Krishna mantra regularly, we'll be cured. And then otherwise, the regular tapasya that we have nowadays, which is nothing, it's impossible to even get out of this cycle. So we have to chant Hare Krishna, not mechanically, but rather we are calling to Krishna to help us. If we, Krishna, I need your help to conquer this maya that we're stuck in. If we stick to the principle of chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra offenselessly, then by the grace of Haridas Thakur, we may be saved from the allurement of women. We've probably all heard of that famous story of Haridas Thakur with the prostitute, and she just sits by him and just listens to him chant. And eventually she becomes a devotee, and that's what we need to do. I'm not saying go just chant in front of everyone. I'll just finish that point there. So if we are not strict in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, then we can fall victim to associating with women or our own lusty desires. So I'll just finish off with this verse that is in Bhagavatam. It's 10.33.39. and it says that anyone who faithfully hears or describes the Lord's playful affairs with the young gopis of Vrindavana will attain the Lord's pure devotional service. Thus he will quickly become sober and conquer lust, the disease of the heart. So it is said that the hearing about these pastimes of Krishna, if one becomes more lusty by seeing these pastimes of Krishna with Radharani, they are not even fit to be human. It is said that Prabhupada says, stop being foolish. So it says that the extraordinary power of these pastimes, it says that these pastimes, these loving pastimes are the opposite of material lusty affairs. So much that even by hearing about the Lord's pastimes, a devotee conquers this sexual desire that we have. And yeah, this is how we can, another way we can conquer these lusty desires, and that's by reading more about Krishna, all his pastimes, and just chanting. So I'll finish there. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki, Shri Radha Gopinath ki, Nitya Gaur Premanande.